Good morning, everybody. We're here today to look at sort of fraud and what goes on round about fraud within the procurement community. I'm joined today by my colleagues at the Competition and Marketing Authority, Brendan and Deborah, and they'll be presenting to you just after I've finished presenting. So I'm Aileen, I'm from Scotland Excels Academy, and for my part of this morning, I'm going to have a quick look at what fraud looks like, sort of from a tendering perspective, some things we can consider, and hopefully give you some kind of hints and tips and something to take away and maybe think about how you look at fraud and what sort of policies, etc. you have in your organisation round about it. So I will just, I should say this morning is getting recorded. It will be available on our Virtual Learning Academy site probably sometime next week. So it will be there for you to go back and have a look at a later date. Questions, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of both sessions this morning. We'll leave it till the end of the sessions and we'll answer if there's any questions after that. So I'm just going to go ahead, share my slides, get started on my side of the presentation, and then I'll hand over to my colleagues, as I say, at the Competition and Marketing Authority. So let me see, I'll get my slide shared. So, as I said, what I'm here to predominantly have a look at today is sort of fraud and what it looks like from a procurement perspective. So what is fraud in procurement? The deliberate deception intended to influence any stage of the procure-to-pay life cycle in order to make a financial gain or cause a loss. So right, I am all through procurement and right through contract management, everything like that. Fraud can be happening. Can be perpetrated by suppliers, contractors or subcontractors external to your organisation, but it can be perpetrated by staff within your organisation. We would hope that doesn't happen, but it has been seen to happen. What does it look like? What on a day-to-day basis could be happening? Bribery, the act of giving or receiving something of value in exchange for some kind of influence or action in return. So somebody's offering you some money for you to do something for them. Collusion, getting together and agreeing to deceive or cheat or carry out something that isn't right. Could have a conflict of interest. Now that doesn't always constitute fraud, but be aware if you have a conflict of interest with anything, you should be highlighting that throughout the procurement process to make sure that it doesn't come up at a later date. Corruption, the abuse of power, fraud, just the general act of carrying out a deception, money laundering, sort of laundering money or gaining money illegally through businesses or bank transfers, things like that. What does it look like? Where does it happen within what we do? Can happen pre-contract, looking at when your tender's out. Things that can happen then, bid reading, price fixing, cover pricing. That's something I have seen happen in the tenders, a couple of tenders that I've done. So just be aware that that can be happening. Can be collusion, suppliers can get together and collude. Bribes or kickbacks, where does that come? Who's being bribed? Is it supplier with supplier or supplier with somebody in your organisation? The post-contract, people sometimes think it just happens at the sort of the main procurement part when the tender's out and we're evaluating the tender and everything. But post-contract, what can happen? Your CSM, that's why it's so important. False invoicing. You could be paying for substandard work. Overpricing of goods and services. How often do you check invoices against what's actually on the contract? Do you do that? I've heard folks say, oh, we just know that they're contracted to us and we just pay. But do you actually check? Also things like cyber fraud and organised crime, organised criminals in the suppliers that you use. So looking a bit deeper at what procurement fraud risks are out there, said earlier, price fixing. Suppliers collude to fix the prices they charge. So that can happen in lots of different ways when you've got your procurement out there. But the suppliers get together and decide through pricing, hopefully, who could maybe win the contract. Market sharing. They could look to divide the market up. Some of the contracts we put out cover the whole of Scotland, so they could maybe get together and decide, I can cover certain areas if you can cover other areas, and they'll work together on putting the bid together. Bid rigging, again, similar to the first two there, but it's basically suppliers getting together, deciding who's going to win the bid and who's going to be involved in the contract once it's won. So it could be that a main supplier will win the bid and use another supplier as a subcontractor on the contract once it's been awarded. Or they can just get together and decide, I'll try and win this tender. We know something's going to come up in the future, you try and win that one. And they work together on who's going to try and win what bids in advance of them being either advertised or awarded. On the other side, manipulation of specifications. It could be that specifications are written that favour a particular bidder, and that's more liable to happen from an in-house perspective. You like a supplier, you could inadvertently do it. You like a supplier, they've been really good, but inadvertently you are writing the spec to favour them in some way, shape or form. Manipulation of the procurement procedures, say rigging exclusion, selection and award criteria for that specific bidder to be able to win it. You say that there is only a single source for what you're looking for, so therefore there is no competition out there, but just a little tweak maybe to what you're looking for and it would open that competition up. So you always need to be sure if you're going for single sourcing that is definitely what it is. There is only that single source for you. Unjustified contract extensions. Seen that happen. Contracts just run on and on and on and they're never really retendered, or they get extended past what is written in the contract initially. And disclosing confidential or commercially sensitive information about bids or supplies that other services or suppliers that a supplier is given to you. Would be bribery. Kickback for awarding a contract to a certain to a certain supplier, or giving them confidential information that will help them to win. Spoken about conflicts of interests. So throughout the procurement process, if at all you think you may have a conflict, you should be highlighting that to your employees, and you should be open and honest about any other interests outside works that you're involved in. Cyber fraud, hacking of systems to obtain information, and we've seen that happen a lot recently, and how easy it is to bring an organisation basically to its knees through cyber fraud. And I spoke about overcharging, overbilling, billing for goods that they aren't delivering or not billing in line with a contract. How do you make sure that's not happening? What do you have in place to check that? Does it regularly get checked? So that's kind of things to think about from procurement. But what about the business sectors? Where could this, or where predominantly does fraud or criminal activities occur? So business sectors, property, things like your construction jobs that you have out there, construction contracts, demolition. I've seen it happening in demolition, sort of things like scaffolding, joinery, repair, all that type of thing. You need to be aware that something can be going on there. Vehicles and transport, taxis and private hire companies, something that some public sector organisations are using quite a lot, along with things like vehicle leasing, sort of that type of thing, courier delivery companies, anything round about that. Services and retail can be a lot round about that, sort of cleaning, laundry facilities, recruitment, market stalls, anything like that, activities involved round about there. The catering and food industry can be involved there, as well as licensing and licensed premises, so your hotels, your nightclubs, all that type of thing. Environmental, your waste disposal, scrap yards, skip hire, involvement there. Recreation, something that I hadn't thought about, but recreation, when you're going to events, big entertainment, festivals, there can be lots going on there. Security, so site security, or security of any sort can be involved. And in the care service, sort of social care, the care homes, that type of thing. Lastly, your professional services, accounting, insurance, legal, money bureaus, all that type of thing. Those are just some of the sectors that can be involved in serious and organised crime. So this slide I've left in is maybe looking at it in a different way, but human trafficking and modern slavery, the little infographic on it really shocked me the first time I saw it. I don't really think of human trafficking and modern slavery within Scotland. You know what's happening. You always think it's happening out with Scotland, but that really hit home. All the little red dots is where it has been found to happen, and this is taken from Scottish Government serious and organised crime strategy. So, and it's showing that even up in the Highlands and Islands and that, there's still human trafficking going up there. So what kind of sectors do we get human trafficking in? Says there hairdressing or any kind of beauty, sort of nail salons, that type of thing. Demolition, what we spoke about earlier, demolition, the waste industry, cafes, restaurants, cleaning, delivery. And that's why it shows it's happening all over Scotland. You maybe wouldn't realise human trafficking is happening in those kind of sectors, but those sectors are all over our country, and that's why it shows that it happens everywhere for us. So you should be aware of that as well. So when we're carrying out our tenders, what do we have to help us? The SPD. We ask lots of questions through the SPD, but also within the regulations, two different sets of regulations. They both have regulations setting out reasons for excluding for criminal convictions or criminal activity. So it's Regulation 58 of the 2015 regulations and Regulation 8 and 9 in the 2016 regulations. And what do they say that you should do or have as part of your tender? So all tenders that you put out should have one or either of these notices put into them. So for above GPA thresholds, it's the top one, saying that suppliers will be excluded if they're found to, if they're in any of the situations referred to in Regulation 58 of the 2015 regs, and below, for below GPA thresholds notices, if operators are found to be in any of the situations in Regulations 8 or 9 of the 2016 regulations. So you should always have one of those paragraphs in your contract notice when you put your contract notice out. What else does the SPD have? I'm not going to go into all the details of this, but just a quick run through. When you're doing your SPD, it asks things like suppliers to confirm yes or no to some questions round about common law of conspiracy. Are they involved in any, or have they been found guilty of being involved in any corruption or bribery or any other offences round about that? Have they been involved in any terrorist offences, or are they linked to terrorist activities? Have they been involved in money laundering or terrorist financing or drug trafficking? And then there's that any other offence in the directive there. They also ask if they've been involved in any child labour or human trafficking, payment of taxes and payment of social security. When you're using your SPD, you've got your mandatory discretionary exclusions. So your mandatory exclusions are questions that must be asked through the SPD. And if anybody answers yes, you need to dig further into that and find out what has been happening. Your discretionary exclusions are questions that you may ask as part of the SPD, and you decide on a tender-by-tender basis as to whether it's appropriate to ask the question contained there or not. If you decide to exclude a bidder at this stage, it is important to take into account the size of the contract, the relevance of the breach, and the impact it may have on your operational or reputational risk. Should also bidders have the opportunity to do what we call self-cleansing. So things like if the bidder can satisfy that they have paid or are undertaking to pay any compensation or damages for any of their criminal offences. They've provided details or facts that help investigating authorities, or they have taken appropriate measures within their organisation to make sure whatever has went wrong doesn't go wrong in future. In the case of tax and social security breaches, if they can prove to you that they've met their obligations or are paying it, or they've entered into an agreement to pay the money, or they can give you an explanation as to what has happened there and you are happy with it, then you can accept that. Personally, I have had the tax and social security, and when I queried the organisation, they gave me the background to it. They could show me that they had contacted the tax office when they realised there was a problem, and they could show that that they were repaying the tax and social security that they owed, and it was just about repaid and would be repaid by the time we were awarding the contract. So after discussion, they were allowed to proceed. So it's things like that you need to have a look at, ask questions, think about it, and have a further discussion in your organisation to decide how you're going to take that forward. They shouldn't be excluded if they're found guilty. They're not permanently excluded from entering into any contracts with us. So they're excluded for a maximum of 5 years from the date of any conviction or final judgment for one of the criminal offences listed. The tax and social security, it can be until the outstanding tax is paid, or they can prove that they have entered into a legally binding agreement. And then a maximum of 3 years for any other relevant grounds for exclusion that is listed within the SPD. I touched on it earlier, contract management. A lot of fraud actually happens at sort of once we have awarded a contract and the contract's up and running. What kind of fraud can take place then? And this is why contract supplier management is really important for us. Could be that you get, you're asked for duplicate payments. Councils charged or organisations charged twice for the same goods and services. How do you ensure that's not happening? Do you have something in place to make sure that's not happening? False invoices. There's just do you have checks and balances in place if an invoice comes in and it maybe tells you to pay a different bank account from what's normal from your supplier that you normally pay? Do you have something in place that will catch that? False claims or variations. The supplier saying that's not part of your contract, or we need to do that's extra to what we're doing, or we have to do this to allow this to happen. Is it justified? Are they justified in asking for this extra money or this variation? Sending out false performance reports saying their performance is sort of excellent when really they're not being excellent. What is there to catch that? Be aware of phantom suppliers, folk saying they are suppliers, being fictitious companies, and you inadvertently setting them up to receive payments. Substandard materials, if you're getting goods or service contracts where materials are used, are they using the materials they said they would as part of your contract, or have they substituted something that's cheaper, but they're still charging you for the dearer sort of materials? And then misappropriation of assets. When do you store stuff? Who regulates what is being kept in storage, what's going in and what's going out? Do you have a process round about that? How easy is it for things to go missing within any storage facilities that you have in any storage that you hold? So measures to mitigate, clear governance procedures, audit trails, effective contract management, what I've said, transparency and scrutiny. You should have a risk register completed for all procurements that you're doing, and that should follow throughout the lifetime of it, and make sure that it is regularly being updated. So what kind of things can you think about? What can help with all the things I've spoken about this morning? Making sure you have good financial regulations in place that are clear on where the authorisation limits are within your organisation. Good record keeping is carried out, and there's a separation of duties. So nobody will raise an order, authorise it and pay it. There is that separation. A policy of no purchase order, no payment, no PO, no pay. I'm always surprised that organisations don't have that in place, but make sure it is genuine purchase orders as well that you're getting, and it's not just ones that have been made up. What kind of checks do you carry out on P cards that you have? And again, that risk management. And how does your organisation, what do you have in place for reporting fraud, corruption or money laundering? Your standing orders, again, similar to the financial regulations, but should look at things like conflict of interest, confidentiality, your contract register, how you review your contracts, and separation of duties and procurements. Other things to consider, scheme of delegation. Who authorises what within your organisation? How clear is it? Do you have counsellor and employee codes of conduct? Counsellors, if it's pertinent to you, but employee codes of conduct. Is it clear to your employees what you expect of them? Do you hold a register of interest and a register of gifts and hospitality? Are you open about that? Does everybody know how to record that? Does everybody know what your organisation thinks around gifts and hospitality? Spoken about a risk register. Whistleblowing. Do you have a whistleblowing policy? Do people know how to use that? Do you have mandatory use of the documents within procurement? So do you use the SPD? Do you have good terms and conditions within it? And what kind of certificates do you put out? Do you put out additional certificates asking suppliers to confirm additional information to you as part of your procurement exercise? Do you hold an up-to-date contract register? We're all tasked with holding our contract registers. Are they complete? Are they up to date? And lastly, your IT strategies and policies. what is there to try and protect you against cyber security, and what do you ask for as part of your procurements? The last couple of slides, just questions for you to ask yourself from a procurement, I'm put on it procurement, but it can be just a service point of view. Have you taken a fraud risk and identified any fraud risks possible in what you're doing? So if you're putting out a procurement, has fraud been considered as part of your risk register? Do you have the right approaches, strategies, policies and plans in place? Do you have that no purchase order, no payment policy? How do you raise awareness with new staff about possible procurement fraud and risks within the organisation? What do you tell new staff or existing? How often do you go over this with existing staff? So new staff, is there some kind of learning you give them round about this? Existing staff, is there, again, learning along with all the annual learning that we do? Is there something in there just to highlight fraud and what's going on again? What do you do with counsellors? Do you talk to suppliers about it? How do you link in with other networks? Do you work well with national, regional or local networks to know about what is actually going on in your area? Do you link in with the local police in your area around about awarding contracts, things like that? Do you share information and data about fraud with other organisations? Do you work with anybody? And do you identify areas where internal controls aren't maybe working how they should? How well do you take action on it? How often do you review your procurement procedures in line with best practice? Are you sure that your procedures are compliant with 2015 regulations and that everybody is aware of them? Do you have arrangements in place to encourage staff to raise concerns about money laundering? And do you have effective arrangements for reporting and recording procurement fraud? Is there any whistleblowing arrangements in place? Are staff aware of it? Are they confident that it's confidential and that their concerns will be addressed? So that's looking at it maybe more from a kind of service, sort of mainly procurement point of view. What about the wider organisation? What do you have in place? What things should be thinking about? So how confident as an organisation are you that you're not at risk of purchasing goods or services for organisations linked to serious organised crime? And how have you reached that conclusion? Are you confident you have everything in place you need? Are your procurement and contract management and due diligence procedures robust and implemented and being properly followed? How do you know this? Are they regularly reviewed? When did you last review them? And is there part of them that covers serious and organised crime or fraud risk? Are you confident that staff within your purchasing organisation are aware of the risks of transacting with serious organised crime suppliers? And do they know how to raise concerns? So if they have concerns, who do they speak to? Do they know? And what happens when they've spoken to you? How does the procurement process protect its procurement staff from getting undue pressure applied to them? Is there adequate segregation of duties? So some folk can come and try and pressure us into putting out tenders for specific things that maybe it's not as appropriate as we think. So we're thinking about how we put together the specification, etc., etc. So is there processes in place to protect your staff around about that? Do you keep records of suppliers up to date, and how do you check and verify them that they are actual suppliers? What checks and balances do you carry out as part of the procurement process? How often then do you go back and revisit that? And do you carry out a supplier health check as part of CSM? Supplier health check is simply going back and asking a supplier annually to reconfirm whatever they've put in their SPD or said they will do as part of the contract, or just checking over the SPD questions and questions linked to crime, etc. Doing that annually, asking them to reconfirm annually that they aren't involved in anything. Do you do that as part of contract supplier management? So things to think about from, as I say, a sort of organisation's point of view, but also from the point of view of the service. What kind of, have you considered everything that I've spoken about, and how are you confident that within your day-to-day activities you're protecting your staff against any involvement, and you're protecting your organisation against suppliers coming in that are involved in crime or may commit a fraud with you? So with the right analytical approach, fraud, it can be detected, measured, and appropriate action taken. So it is really important that you consider what policies and processes, procedures you have in place. So that's me at the end of my part of today. Thank you for listening. I've put two links there at the bottom for more information round about fraud, crime prevention, and serious organised crime. It's linked to the Scottish Government. So if you go on there, there's lots and lots of information on this and lots of links that you can follow. So that's my part of the presentation done with. I'm going to hand you over to Brendan and Deborah from the Competition and Marketing Authority, and they'll take you through their presentation. So Brendan and Deborah, are you ready? I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Aileen, and to all of your colleagues at Scotland Excel for having Deborah and myself here today. And thanks to everyone who's joined the session as well. One of the things the Competition and Markets Authority is tasked with is protecting consumers from being ripped off by illegal business cartels. These are, in essence, anti-competitive arrangements between competing businesses, or at least businesses which should be competing. Cartels which affect public procurement can increase prices by 20% or more. The sums of money that some of us, or many of us in this call, will know that can be involved in these contracts. We know that these can be serious numbers. Our focus today is going to be on bid rigging and what you as public procurers can do to recognise and report suspicious activity and to protect yourselves as you go about your business. However, before I hand over to Deborah to provide her significant expertise in these points, I want to give you a quick introduction more generally to the Competition and Markets Authority and what it does, and also to its role in Scotland. The CMA is the UK's competition and consumer protection watchdog. We have an overall focus on driving innovation, productivity and growth by promoting competition for the benefit of people, businesses and the UK economy. To promote competitive behaviour, we investigate mergers, address unfair practices and investigate markets with competition or consumer issues. It's great to have so many organisations from across Scottish life here today. So for those who don't know, a little about our presence here. We have around 90 CMA colleagues based in Queen Elizabeth House in Edinburgh from across the organisation's areas of responsibility. The CMA has a Four Nations mandate, and we have relationships with all of the devolved legislatures, including the Scottish Government here in Edinburgh. And as the organisation's Scotland representative, I'm happy to be the point of contact for anyone today who needs further information on our work or indeed help navigating the CMA further, or just wants to dig further into some of the content in today's presentation. And I'll now pass over to Deborah for the main part of our presentation today.
Hey everyone, and great to speak to you today. So I'm Deborah Wilkie. I'm a director in our competition enforcement team, and I've spent now over a decade investigating this kind of illegal collusion that we've been talking about. So we're focused on the kind of pre-contract phase here, and I've put the word cartels there. So a question I often ask is, what do you think of when you hear that word? Because it's worth dealing with that modern, a common misconception people have when we talk about what we do in investigating cartel activity. It often conjures up an association in people's minds with serious organised crime, such as drug trafficking in South America. But in this context, cartels involve anti-competitive agreements between businesses. And as we've talked about, these are businesses who should be competing with each other, but instead are getting together, colluding to rig the market in their favour. So ripping off customers, often forcing them to pay higher prices for poorer quality goods and services, and restricting choice. And in the context of public sector procurement, the victim is the procuring authority and ultimately the taxpayer. Cartels also harm honest, fair-dealing businesses that are working hard to innovate and succeed in challenging economic times. Aileen mentioned cartel conduct can take many forms, for example, price fixing, sharing out the market, agreements to limit production. But today we're going to focus on bid rigging and how we at the CMA can help you mitigate this risk through our detection and surveillance tools, including our data science capabilities. So cartels, particularly bid rigging, which we're going to focus on today, are a type of fraud, as we've talked about, and they can often be combined with other forms of criminal activity. So, for example, I would definitely support what Aileen said, where public officials receive financial or other rewards, such as holidays, promise of subsequent employment, or in some construction cases, we've seen free home improvements in return for awarding contracts to a preferred bidder. The corrupt public official can facilitate the operation and stability of a bid rigging cartel. In bid rigging cases, we sometimes also uncover evidence of dodgy payments, so what are known as compensation payments, sometimes referred to as drinks money between bidders. So this is where a company who submitted a deliberately high bid is compensated by the winning bidder for not competing against them. False invoices are also sometimes raised to disguise the real reason for the payment, but sometimes payment is just paid in cash. In other cases, the payment can be an agreement to subcontract out valuable parts of the work to the competitor. So due to this sort of combination of activity, we work closely with other agencies such as the Serious Fraud Office, but also City of London Police and HMRC and other organisations. In our experience, a lot of the cartels we uncover start as a result of difficult economic circumstances. So we're therefore concerned with the state of the economy at the moment. There is currently a high risk. There are other collusion characteristics to look out for. So I've popped a few on the slide here. So you might be wondering how cartels are formed, what sort of industry, market circumstances we tend to see in cartel cases. And we have seen cartels in a broad range of industry. It's clear there are various industry or product characteristics that can create conditions to help cartels form and thrive, although they need not all be present for companies to successfully collude with each other. So the factors we've got there are if there's a small number of companies in an industry, so if there are little or no new players coming onto the market, periods of economic strain is often a feature. Also, the product involved or the service involved, where we're seeing very similar or identical products being offered. If there aren't many substitutes for those products or alternative suppliers, and then also if you've got existing channels of communication between rivals, so that is often a good route for them to be communicating about things where they can start to collude, fix prices, etc. What I will say is if you do have any suspicions or concerns about potential cartels, it's also worth asking yourself if any of these features are present. Since we began in 2014, the CMA has been investing in our capabilities to ensure the effective enforcement against those cartels and other anti-competitive practices. And we've started to see the results of that work in the past few years. We've issued fines of over 322 million against companies involved in cartels. We have the power to fine companies up to 10% of their worldwide turnover if they're found to have broken the law. There's also been action taken against individuals involved. So 28 people have been disqualified from acting as directors for their role in anti-competitive conduct, and 2 people have been given criminal convictions. As well as being fined, it's also worth noting that businesses can face damages claims by third parties, and that does include government or local authorities where they've been victims of cartels. And that is, I would say, an increasingly significant aspect of our cartel enforcement. So, for example, we issued a decision in one case and a damages claim was made against one of the parties for cartel activity dating back an entire decade. Reputational harm can also be an issue for suppliers who are involved in this type of activity. So recently, one company we found to have been involved in a cartel was thrown out of its trade association. Companies involved in cartels can also face, as Aileen talked about, exclusion or debarment from public procurement. So despite these dangers, competition law risk surprisingly remains low on boardroom agendas. Just 18% of those we polled said their business had senior level discussions about it, trailing far behind health and safety and employment law. So as I mentioned, the Procurement Act 2023, this came in force earlier this year. That has introduced some stronger rules on exclusion of suppliers involved in cartel activity. Although the Procurement Act doesn't currently apply to procurements limited only to Scotland, we understand Scottish Government have plans to enable procurement under the Act. And I would say in any case, the Act may well apply to any of your suppliers who are working outside of Scotland. So very briefly, under that Act, suppliers participating in cartel activity risk mandatory exclusion by a contracting authority from an individual public procurement for up to 5 years, or being included on the central debarment list, which is being run by the Cabinet Office, and that could result in them being automatically excluded from all public procurements for up to 5 years. So for suppliers, definitely the best way to avoid that is to remain compliant with competition law. If a supplier does realise they've infringed competition law, there are steps they can take to make amends and avoid exclusion. One of those I would flag includes admitting wrongdoing to us, the CMA, and applying for leniency as the first supplier in a cartel to report it to the CMA and be granted immunity from fines won't be excluded or appear on that central debarment list. Second, it's worth noting, again, Aileen touched on it, suppliers will not be excluded or added to the debarment list if they can demonstrate they've self-cleaned. So the wrongdoing that led to that exclusion ground applying won't happen again. So I'm not going to go into much detail on that today, but there is plenty of guidance available online, including a quick plug for a really helpful CMA blog explaining what suppliers and procurers need to know about the new regime. So we'll give you some signposts to that later. So not only are the consequences serious, the risk of getting caught is real. So we have strong powers of investigation which allow us to take action where we have reasonable grounds to suspect cartel activity, and that is a low evidential threshold. So we have powers to turn up with a warrant and search company offices unannounced, request information and documents, also known as dawn raids. We can also search home addresses of those suspected of involvement in cartel agreements. We can interview people either using compulsory interview powers or on a voluntary basis. And we can compel companies or individuals to give us information or documents. We also have strong powers under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 and the Investigatory Powers Act, meaning that we're able to use a number of techniques. We can use surveillance, for example, to covertly record cartel meetings. We can also use covert human intelligence sources to obtain information for us. And we can access communications data to gain evidence. So, for example, we can obtain mobile telephone records of individuals that we suspect to be involved. And these intelligence capabilities have worked well. They mean that over half our cases are intelligence-led. And typically there are 2 ways our investigations start. The first is here we've got leniency, where a business comes to us, blows the whistle and applies for leniency. And that effective leniency regime is a really important part of our strategy to detect and enforce against this cartel activity. And it helps us ensure we reach enforcement outcomes in an efficient way. Since the publication of that guidance 12 years ago, we've received nearly 250 leniency applications, and cases with leniency applicants have resulted in more than 355 million in financial penalties and 24 directors' disqualifications. So we've recently updated that guidance, and there are significant benefits for suppliers who are the first into us, including, as I've mentioned now, exemption from exclusion or debarment under the new Procurement Act. So while leniency is important for us, so where companies realise they've done the wrong thing and they confess and come forward, it's far from being the only way that we detect this kind of activity. As I said, around half our cases are what we call own initiative cases, where we use those powerful detection tools, gathering evidence, including from informants and whistleblowers, as well as working with potential victims, particularly in the public sector, where we're applying our in-house data science expertise to tackle bid rigging in public procurement. And I'll talk about more on this later on. So why is it important? Look, we've heard bid rigging is a key risk in public procurement. That kind of procurement in this country is economically very significant. So it represents around a third of all UK public expenditure, covers a large range of markets for goods, works and services. We spend in the UK around 385 billion on public procurement every year, and more than 16 billion in Scotland. And that figure is only set to increase. So if you consider the sums being spent through public procurement, then the potential harm from any bid rigging becomes really evident, and it's harm that's felt throughout society. By taxpayers and all of us who use public infrastructure and services and who are denied the benefits of competition. So it's really important we're all on high alert to that risk. So what is it? It comes in a variety of forms. They're all designed to manipulate the tender process for a contractor's benefit. It's really important to recognise these. So we've put some details here that you can notice where they might be happening. Some of the most common bid rigging activities, and these can occur together, include bid suppression. So that's where companies agree not to submit a bid at all, which means other firms face less competition to win the contract. And this, as we've said, is sometimes or normally done in exchange for some kind of kickback or payment, or as part of an arrangement where the winning bidder then subcontracts part of the work out to the non-competing firm. We also have bid rotation, where companies agree to take it in turns to submit the most attractive bid on a project, so ensuring they all have what they consider to be a fair share of the market. Cover pricing is where companies that don't want to win the contract communicate with their competitors and agree to submit inflated cover bids for the job, so a bid from another company looks much better value. And then customer or market allocation is where companies agree to divide up customers or geographic areas between them. And these companies will then not bid or submit only token bids to a customer or in an area not assigned to them, meaning that there's no true competition between them. So that's the theory, but what does it look like in practice? Aileen mentioned demolition, and actually one of our recent cases involved the demolition sector. Following an investigation we launched in 2019, we found that 10 firms had engaged in bid rigging on 19 contracts worth over 150 million for demolition and asbestos removal works. We imposed fines on the companies totaling 60 million almost, and we've disqualified 4 company directors for their role in the bid rigging. The contracts involved were mainly in the southeast of England, such as the Met Police Training Centre in Hendon, Bow Street Magistrates Court and Police Station, Selfridges and offices in the South Bank, but there were also contracts elsewhere in Reading, Oxford and Coventry. That investigation was large in scale and complex. We executed search warrants at 13 company premises and seized large volumes of documentary and electronic material, which we then sift through and analyse. We also conducted interviews with those individuals suspected of involvement. And what we found was that the bid rigging took place with the deliberate intention of deceiving the customer into believing they were receiving competitive bids when this was not in fact the case. And the bids were, again, rigged through the practice of cover pricing, where firms agreed to submit deliberately high or inflated bids to ensure another bidder would win the contract. As a result, not only is the customer deceived, but they can also end up paying higher prices. Clearly, if you as a bidder know you're not facing any competition, the temptation will be to put prices up. And then evidence in this case came from a number of sources. So I thought it might be interesting actually to show, because often people don't really know what this might look like. And evidence in this case came from a number of sources. So we had text, WhatsApp, emails, and all of which are common to our investigations. And the evidence on this slide, it relates to a Selfridges contract, which you can have a read through. They're an example of blatant contact about the contract and discussion about the figures they're going to be submitted. We've got, can you give us a ring in the morning to discuss the numbers? And this is between competitors or companies that should be competing. And following on from those texts, we then saw that an email went out the next day where we've got A telling or showing B what their tender proposal is. And it then goes further by giving instructions as to how B should change its own tender proposals to the extent of telling them the spread by which they should increase their price above theirs and changes to the length of the work, which is another important part of any bid. We also have current investigations ongoing. In December last year, we launched an investigation, again, by carrying out unannounced inspections at several business premises. And this was based on suspicions that several companies providing roofing and construction services, including contractors and technical advisors, colluded to rig bids to secure contracts funded through the Department of Education's Condition Improvement Fund, which can involve significant amounts of money. That investigation is still at an early stage, so I'm not going to comment any further on this, and no assumptions should be made that competition law has been broken at this stage. But I did want to include it just to show that we are working hard still to ensure that public procurement is working well, and that really remains a priority for the CMA. So what can procurers do to reduce the chances of you being a victim of bid rigging? So there are 4 steps here we recommend. So be aware, great job being here today, actually. Be aware what bid rigging is. Be alert to the fact it does happen. We have some advice on the subject, and I'm going to signpost that later. Design and manage your procurement process in a way that reduces the risk of bids being rigged. Recognise the red flags, so the kinds of suspect activities, patterns of behaviour that might suggest bid rigging. And then finally, know how to report suspicious activity to the CMA. And I'll also point you in the direction of how to do that. And we really very much encourage people to report concerns or suspicions to us. So I know we had a query about abnormally low tendering. Should this be reported? Look, if you have those kind of suspicions, yes, absolutely do come and speak to us about them. One important point I wanted to flag, and it's in the big orange box. If you do suspect bid rigging, please don't attempt to speak to the suppliers involved about it. That may result in them sort of being tipped off, and it does make our job of investigating and obtaining evidence much harder. So any concerns, come and speak to us first. So to help you avoid falling victim to bid rigging, here are some of the common red flags that might indicate potentially suspicious bids. So for instance, identical bids, perhaps for individual line items or including similar wording, spelling mistakes or calculations, higher bids than expected without logical cost differences, bids containing less detail than you might expect, signs of alterations to bids, so in track changes indicating last minute changes, clear gaps between the winning bid and others can sometimes be a sign, and then also having the same increments between bids. So for example, all respective bids increase by 5%, or perhaps you don't get as many bids as you were expecting. And here are a few more red flags which I'll let you read through. We've seen all of these featuring in our cases. However, we do appreciate none of these are a sort of silver bullet to confirm that bid rigging is taking place. So all we would ask is if you see one of these, stop and think. Was this what you were expecting? Is it raising some suspicions in your mind? If it does, or even if you're not sure, then we'd very much encourage you to speak to us. It may be that we already hold some information or intelligence about a particular industry or particular companies which might be relevant and links to other suspicious behaviour we've seen. It's also, as we've mentioned, well worth collecting data over time and benchmarking with previous projects and with other procurers, so you have a good idea of what the right price should be for particular products and services, and to help you spot any anomalies or suspicious behaviour in a particular tender exercise. So here, this is a really exciting thing for me that I've recently got involved in. We recognise we can't take action against cartels without the help of partners. We regularly exchange information and intelligence with other law enforcement agencies, regulators, government departments and local authorities. It's often internal and local procurement or fraud teams who will come across the suspicious behaviour, and so are able to alert us to it so we can take action. And at the CMA, we are always looking for ways to generate leads and cases. We're being increasingly proactive. An example of this is the work that we're doing on cartel screening. So in collaboration with our data science team in competition enforcement, we're working to identify potential collusion between bidders by using screening tools to analyse tender data. So by reviewing procurement data, including things like bid values, locations and win rates, our data scientists are able to highlight suspicious bidding behaviour. Because this data-based approach allows us to take a wide lens view of multiple contracts over time and in different areas, it can help us to detect patterns indicating collusion which might be harder to spot otherwise. And similar tools have already been used successfully in other countries, including South Korea and Spain, and we're now actively expanding our data screening programme. So we have tested these tools on real tender data provided by public sector procurement organisations, but the data science team at the TMA tell me they can never have enough data. So we are seeking to work collaboratively with public sector bodies to continue to develop and test this tool. So we're always looking to obtain further tender data. The type of information we're interested in and would need is not complex. I would say one thing it's really useful for us to have is losing bid data. So not just who won a particular bid, but other people who bid and who lost. And why would you want to partner with us, or why would this be a benefit to you? So it's a free of charge service for you as part of our remit to detect and deter cartels. You would only need to collate and send us the data, and our data scientists do the rest. Those tools go beyond the simple checks. They can highlight strategies that aren't obvious from a review of the procurement documents on their own. While they don't prove that bid rigging has occurred, those tools can help identify any issues with procurement processes that you might then want to look at. And this can also be a sort of useful part of your organisation's counter-fraud strategy. They've talked about the importance of having that approach to detecting fraud in your organisation so we can stop it happening. And this will provide an objective analysis of your tenders to check for unlawful behaviour, acting as a bit of a safety net in case your manual procedures miss anything. And any red flags identified can be used to inform next steps and how you deal with higher risk tenders. So if this is something you'd be interested in working with us on, then we would be more than happy to discuss it further. We know it's not always easy to share data. There might be barriers to doing that. If that is the case, please do reach out to us, as there might be ways we can support or assist your team, including with extracting some of that data. So here, where to find out more? At the CMA, we've put out loads of really user-friendly advice on our cheating or competing campaign page, and that's to help you deter, detect and report illegal competitive practices like bid rigging in procurement. So on that campaign page, we have things like a free e-learning tool designed specifically for public sector procurers. That's a module that takes around 30 minutes to complete. It has a short test to check levels of understanding at the end. We've got a quick guide in there with advice for public sector procurers on how to spot, deter and report suspect activity. It's also got some really great explainer videos on the main types of cartels or collusion, and some case studies which look back on our most recent cases and the lessons learned by other businesses. We've got a page also specifically developed for wage fixing and no poaching agreements aimed at human resource specialists, for instance. There's lots of stuff, much of which we haven't touched on today, but where we've got some really good user-friendly guidance for you to use. I would say the main source of further information on exclusion and debarment from the CMA is that blog that I mentioned, and there's an information note behind it on exclusion and debarment on competition grounds, and that includes sections on steps suppliers can take to avoid exclusion and debarment, and probably most interestingly for you, how the CMA can help contracting authorities. And we've got there an email address for contracting authorities, such as yourself, to use to contact the CMA. You can also use that if you're interested in sharing the procurement data that I mentioned for bid rigging screening. The Cabinet Office has also produced some really helpful guidance on that new Procurement Act and on exclusions and debarments as well. So my last slide is sort of how to report to us. We've got a few options. You can call the cartels hotline. This is if a supplier thinks they've been involved in a cartel. You can also report via our online reporting form or email us their cartels hotline. As I said, if you've got any questions about sort of procurement related issues, we also have that CMA procurement support email. And I think we're about time for questions. I think we had one in the chat. Aileen, was there anything else that we wanted to cover from the chat?
I've not seen anything in the chats. Yeah, thanks very much, Deborah and Brendan. That was really, really interesting. And I think just went a wee bit further than kind of digging a bit deeper than what I was talking about in mine. And certainly some of what you've said I have seen happening in procurements that I have done. But anybody got any questions they want to ask, you can ask or pop them into the chat. We can get you unmuted if you would like to speak to us. No, everybody's very quiet this morning, so that's fabulous then. As I said, the presentation that we've done this morning, that will come onto our Academy website. I know we were asked where we're going to share the slides. We'll put it up on the Academy website, and everybody that has access into our Academy will be able to go and see, revisit it at any time they want. That's fine. So somebody's put only whether ALT falls under anti-competitive, what's that, abnormally low tendering. I think you did cover that, did you, Deborah? Yeah.
So I would say, look, it's one of those red flags. If you're seeing bids that are suspiciously low, as I say, have a think about those sort of conditions where collusion might be possible. If you're seeing those as well, I would say you're in the territory of, look, give us a call and chat it through.
That's brilliant. And I've been told there's one hand up. Sorry, I might not have been the best person to do this because my Teams isn't working right. I can't see
That's okay.
what's happening. So Maxwell, did you have a question? Is somebody going to unmute Maxwell so they can speak?
I think it might be the question in the chat, which is what role might AI...
Right.
Is that right? Oh. What role might AI play in bid rigging or the detection of procurement fraud? So I think that's your question. Look, Maxwell, I would say it's a watch this space area. We know it's an environment where there is an awful lot of data. I am very excited about the possibilities of what that gives us in terms of detection. That's why in the enforcement team, we're now partnering with data scientists to look at what we can tell from the data. So I would say I'm hoping there'll be steps we can take to use it to help us detect procurement fraud. I think it's definitely, look, we know suppliers will be using AI. We all have to get familiar with it going forward. So yeah, it's definitely not something we can't ignore.
That's fabulous. Thanks so much for that, Deborah. If there's no other questions, that'll be us finished for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. There's been just sort of about 190 of you on today, so thank you so much. As I say, there's a question there, is it possible presentation by email? Not, but anybody who wants access to it can have access into our Academy site. So anybody that wants to see it through the Academy, just if they aren't already members or don't have an access into it, tell them just to contact us and we will get them access into it. So thank you everybody for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you something to think about, both not just your departments, how they work, but your organisations as a whole. So thank you, and we'll see you next time when we do something like this.
Thanks, Aileen, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.